Hello, everybody. Stick with us. Whynde Kuehn today. We're going to be talking big picture, the golden thread, and the experience economy. We'll see you in a few.
All right, Mr. SimpleBiz guy, let's start the show.
Hello, everybody. Jeff Mason and Whynde Kuehn coming to you today on SimpleBiz360 podcast. Wendy, hello to you in Southwest Norway. How are you?
Good, doing great, and great to see you, sir. And it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being on today. And if you could, just give us a little bit of a shout out in terms of who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, the way I look at it is every day I wake up, I serve a global vision and community for better strategy execution for organizations that are designed with intent, underpinned by something called business architecture, which we'll talk about. And I am a longtime business architecture practitioner, pioneer, educator, thought leader, and community builder. Have practiced the discipline from about every angle you can imagine, from sort of top to bottom transformations to having my own team to using it for social entrepreneurs and cross-sector initiatives. And most recently, I'm proud to say I am author of the book Strategy to Reality.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, folks. Wendy, thanks so much. And again, Norway, we're coming to you from St. Louis here at Half Coast Studios. Folks, SimpleBiz360.com is our home. You can find us. We're on YouTube and 28 listening platforms, IGTV for shorter episodes as well. And after this episode, by the way, we resume our 3 business tips in 5 minutes podcast format. So we're real excited about that. But today, this is really a super cool podcast for me to do because as I'll explain in a few minutes, I've lived through something that Wendy touches on every day of her life and has for so long. And so, at any rate, it's going to be so great. And again, Rick Diana, a good friend of mine that I started working with in the mid-1980s in New York City, he introduced us. Your book is coming out on the hard copies, coming out on the 20th of September. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But gosh, let's get to know you first, if we could. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm a Wisconsin girl. So I'm from the States. I'm from the Midwest. And, I do think that really shapes how I see the world. I became a big city girl, Chicago, New York. Now I live in Norway, as you mentioned. But from Wisconsin. My parents are my heart and my head. I grew up with wide open green grass and lakes and a lot of nature and a lot of imagination.
Wow. Yeah, Wisconsin, for those who have never been to that state, please put it on your bucket list. Try to get out there. So many beautiful spots. So many great lakes, touch. We got 2 of them that touch that wonderful state. It's just an awesome place to be. So, see if you can make it up there. Any rate, so, this whole concept of strategy to reality, was this part of your childhood DNA in any possible way?
Well, good question. Maybe, I found as I worked around the world that there was this big gap between ideas and execution of them. And it didn't matter if it was a really large corporation or a startup or a social entrepreneur or a cross-sector initiative in Africa. There's sort of this gap here that I became fascinated with, that it exists and why it exists. So, a coach once told me that my word was big. And I think that's right. I think that reflects a lot of things that I do. But like I said, I just fell in love with this idea of how do we manifest really big ideas? Because it doesn't matter how great the idea is if we can't get it into action. So that's kind of the genesis of that. And to your point about the childhood, I do feel like I very much became the person I always was. My mom always says, Wendy, you're a teacher. And she recently reminded me that I would come home from school and sort of be running to the computer to write stories for my teachers. So very much in my DNA to, be teaching and writing and helping people to really envision and make real ideas, that are just concepts today and in something concrete tomorrow.
Sure. Well, that's awesome. So, you started looking at the gap between somebody's thought process and how that would be taken or put into a form of action. So with that, starts this whole, I imagine if you're like me and like other people I've bumped into that are thinkers like you are, you start to look at every aspect of life through that kind of lens. Is that right or wrong with you?
It is very much so, very much so. From a business sense or from, let's say, an initiative, it's maybe this is the wrong word to use, but the concept manifests in a hard way, right? But it very much permeates my life. And I love that you asked this, because just even my own dreams or working with other people to help make their dreams come true, it's always about this seeing it, believing it, and then taking steps to actually make it happen. So you're right. It's like taking a journey of the becoming very much underpins who I am and what I do in all aspects.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so, and we forget this. We seem to forget this as a general population all too often. We relied on Rand McNally maps for so many years, and then we switched to, MapQuest, and then we switched to, Google Earth and all these, let's get directions on Google, right? That's the default go-to. But yet when we get into business and when we get into operating on a daily basis, there is so much of this knee slapping, let's just take a crack at it. And, wait, if you were going to go to Wisconsin and go to Wendy's hometown, you would need a set of directions to get you there, or you'd have to carve out your own directions by looking at a topographical, map of some sort. So why are we, or roadmap? So why are we not running businesses this way? I mean, do you have philosophical C-suite discussions that hinge on this question?
I couldn't love this more, because you point out what is a tremendous sense of cognitive dissonance for me and other people like us that say exactly what you said, Jeff. If you wanted to go from one place or another, you'd have a map, right? Anything we do, we have these common mental models to communicate and to understand and how to make changes, right, to something. So even think about a house and a blueprint, making changes to that. But it's so strange that in business, we don't bring the same mindset. We kind of have this siloed, like you say, the knee slap, like everybody just runs and does stuff. I think about this all the time. I think part of it is rooted in just the way we're taught to think in some of our institutions. For example, we've recently done a study of graduate business education curriculums and identified that we really don't teach strategy execution end to end in a very cohesive way, or underpin it with this map, right? This architecture of a business. So part of it is just we're not taught to think that way. If we think about school, math is over here, science is over there, reading is over there, or even in business school, marketing is over here, strategy is over here, right? You get the idea. So it's this idea of thinking in systems and thinking about the whole that we don't necessarily teach people to do. So I think that's part of it. And I think that's the shiftable part. But I also think, I philosophize that there is also something human about this, because we try to, as humans, whittle down the world and kind of form our tribes or form our silos or form the things that we're familiar with, and that tends to kind of silo our thinking instead of coming up and looking at the big picture as well.
Yeah. I mean, and such a danger in business. And I've had the luxury, I kind of feel like I've really had an MBA, and I'm more like a, master consultant. I've worked for 32 different companies in 9 different industries. And so I've, my calling and my love affair is with the customer satisfaction, customer experience. So I've been able to immerse myself into 32 of these customer service machines. And what I find fascinating and such a commonality between all of them is there are these operational silos that are sealed, shut down. There are no conveyor belts to the next silo. There is no way for us to effectively build a communication network to get, and then there's all these strains that are put on. Well, marketing hates what sales is doing because sales is out there and doing their own thing and not talking to marketing and operations. Like, hey, you guys are forgetting us. It's never going to work. I don't care what marketing says. I don't care what sales says. And there's nothing that's there's no, I used to always call it the conveyor belt. There's no conveyor belt going from one to another. So yes, I think we are, I think we've been programmed a little bit in society, and we carry it into business in that, hey, it's a me world. What's in it for me? What's good for me? And you know what? I don't really care if my neighbor is affected this way or that way. It's what's good for me. And so, I think, so, this conundrum, if you will, if you want to call it that exists in big business. And let's tell the audience how much it does exist in big business. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you mean the strategy execution gap?
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is, and I mean, I can spout all sorts of quotes, but the truth is the quotes abound in terms of the number of change initiatives that fail, or the high percentage of employees that don't understand the strategy, or the fact that HR and IT departments develop strategic plans that aren't aligned to the corporate, right? I say it's like having a rock in your shoe. It's like our organizations have become so used to operating a little bit ineffectively on getting strategies into action that we've just become used to it, and we kind of like, when we hear those stats, we're like, yeah, I guess that really is. But it is it's at the heart of a challenge for a lot of organizations. Part of why it's become so important, though, is because I would say two things. One is what you're saying, it's the customer. Now we have to act like one company. So we can't let those silos and all those challenges we have show to the customer. We have to be able to deliver a cohesive and consistent and exceptional experience to them. So that has been a catalyst. The other thing is that we just have to be able to deal with a lot of change, disruption, digital connectedness around the world. It's, change is the new normal. So it's like we've got to have this muscle to get ideas into action very quickly and well.
Yeah. Okay. So you mention in your book, you call business architecture a discipline. Can you explain that a little bit?
Ooh, absolutely. And this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. So you can think about a business architecture as a thing. As you were articulating really well before, we're moving from one place to another. Maybe we're going on a road trip. We have a map, right? A map is something we all agree to, and it gives us a common view, a common mental model of how we see the world. But it's also a discipline in terms of organizations actually not only build business architectures, but they have a role called a business architect. And they also allow, obviously, and want other people in the organization to use the business architecture for decision making. So I call it a discipline because there's really a rigor around it, how you build the architecture, how you use it, and how you institutionalize the practice and the use of business architecture into everything the organization does, from strategic planning and portfolio investments to solutions to how you use it for sustainability.
Okay. So a funny question. Can a small restaurant have business architecture built into the business model of the restaurant? In other words, table number 17 just complained that they got a mojito with a couple leaves in it that looked like they were 3 days old. They were brown and wilted, and the ladies over there gagging. How can, is there a discipline they can institute that is akin to this larger business architecture?
Most certainly. And I appreciate that you asked that, because I tend to talk about the bigger organizations because they have the most pain and they have the most, the biggest need for this blueprint, right? But there is, no matter what sector, no matter what industry, no matter what size of organization, the idea of business architecture is relevant. And in fact, there's not only practical ways of using the business architecture for the restaurant to maybe look at, the flow of what happened to deliver that customer that mojito with those wilted leaves, right? But there's also the matter of, as businesses grow, we can head off a lot of the challenges that happen to big organizations if we structure it right from the beginning. I've worked with startups, Jeff, and this is really this is really the key. And I have investors and, entrepreneurs that really understand that if they bring some structure to their thinking, and if they are smart about how they build capabilities and scale this organization and put the blueprint in place, that as they grow, they're going to be able to tell their story better, get better investment, get better partners, feel more confident, and, like I said, scale with heading off those things that tend to happen later. So it's pretty powerful stuff, actually.
Bingo. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, not only did that happen, my wife got a whole glass of ice water spilled on her first, which was, it was actually beer, excuse me. And then once she cleaned that up, she got her mojito, and the mint leaves were, it was like, okay, you couldn't see, but anyway, another podcast. But so folks, let's for argument's sake, I'm going to give you an imagine, if you will. I'm going to give our listeners and viewers, imagine, if you will, that you're an executive vice president. You come into a new company. It's a $220 million company. They've been working on an ERP installation for a year, right? Enterprise resource planning. Like, that's the step up from the old days, the MRP system, Oliver Waite and the MRPs. So, you come in and you see this, and all of a sudden they're talking about, July 2nd, we're going to implement this ERP system. And you're like, wait a second, can I just throw my 2 cents in? You're violating the Oliver Waite principle. You're not running a parallel system. Like, you're not keeping your legacy system up while you're implementing this, and nobody tested it in a small segment of the customer base. No, we're just going to go ahead and do it. And then, imagine, if you will, that they go ahead and do that. And then all of a sudden, your company, $220 million company, has to spend $250,000 in consulting fees. You can't go visit customers for 14 months. You couldn't ship an invoice. You couldn't ship an order for 4 weeks. You couldn't invoice. You dove into cash reserves for $4 million. What happened is the strategy and the execution, and a big and the red lights are flashing. Guess what, Wendy? That happened to me. I lived through that. And you're talking about a company at that point that was breaking even. And so, it's amazing to me that we've got people out there that continue to do that in those types of larger companies. So, with that on your doorstep, explain, if you could, a little bit about what would you say to that scenario?
Yeah, well, it's I like to say let's slow down now for a moment so that we can speed up later, because I do find in scenarios like this, there's a lot of organizations have a bias towards action, and they have a bias towards technology and solution, right? So first thing, before we even get down there, is taking it back to the why, taking it back to what we're trying to achieve and the objectives, and how this fits into the bigger picture, and the bigger picture timing of other things happening as well. That I find even there, sometimes what's very obvious to one group of people in the organization, when we really break it down to the why, it's not the most logical thing to do or to do now. But the second, and I think maybe the biggest impact in this case, is using the business architecture, using our map, right, to understand impact analysis and options. Because if we look at this is what we want to do, and inevitably taking that ERP back to the capabilities, that other things are going to be going on with, human resources and finance and capabilities that might, other people are uplifting
Sure.
in other initiatives and things right now. We can really understand if these are the capabilities that we're impacting. What are the stakeholders that are going to be impacted? To what extent are things going to be impacted? Are there other ripple effects that we don't know? I've seen this a lot with legacy. Oh, it's just a legacy modernization, but it has such a ripple effect in the organization. So with that, really pulling out the map and understanding all of the impacts, we can make a better informed decision on, either move into the implementation in the right way, or pause, or whatever it needs to do. But yeah, I think the impact is really the big one there.
Yeah. And I think that you would also, I glean from reading what I have so far, that you also are an advocate of, you kind of have to come to grips in 2022 that the business landscape is going to necessarily change. and you've got to be willing, and Charles in his foreword, really hones in on the same concept. You've got to be willing to adapt to this, and you've got to react. And to do so, you need this architecture.
Absolutely. The architecture and a cohesive strategy to execution process. I say organizations have to do change well. So it's not good enough anymore to show up and transform that thing or have this long-term strategy. It's a continual sense and respond. And then add on to that some of the global shockwaves we've had, right? With political unrest and pandemic and things like that, organizations have got to also build the muscle for change underpinned by that architecture.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. So, Charles, who wrote your foreword, mentioned that, he really bottled everything up, and leading up to it, he said, we're in this experience economy, which we are, I believe, and I've believed this, I've been believing this since 1988. I've really watched it, and to me, it's so evident. But to the digital world, and you're in a genre that not all of us are in. You're in the architecture where you're now really, from an IT point of view, you're the engineer that's putting this together. Could you speak to how important the experience is, both internally and externally?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you, and I agree with Charles that the experience is the thing and will continue to be the thing. This is the customer experience, yes, but it's also the partners and employees, right? Because everything comes together in support of that customer. In addition, in our digital world, we're also building business ecosystems, sort of these systems of value delivery. So even from that perspective, experience is important. In fact, Jeff, you were referring to silos before, which is a big challenge in organizations. And I have found customer and customer experience to be one of the greatest rallying points, one of the greatest whys and impetus for organizations to actually, I'm going to say, be able to work together across the silos and streamline the business and technology environment so that they can show up to deliver that cohesive environment. And again, that's actually where I think the architecture is critical, because it serves up, it orchestrates all the people, process, and technology in support of delivering those experiences in an integrated and a consistent way.
Yeah.
So right on.
Yeah. And so important. Well, it's it's so cool. And when you really dive into this whole concept, which I really have not, spent time looking into it until I got together I did another podcast a couple of weeks ago where I really got into, looking at the client engagement process through the eyes of the, IT world. And it was really fascinating. And so this is a much larger snapshot of it. But now we kind of, let's get into the fun stuff about the book and how, you bottled this up and put it into something where everyone could benefit. And I do just want to mention you had a very successful blog that kind of was your stepping stone into this book. Could you explain that a little bit if you could?
Oh, absolutely. Because I also think there's such a journey and a lesson in that. But so I had a blog called Straight Talk, and it went for 4 years. So from 2017 to 2021, and I delivered 100 issues. And my goal was to, especially keeping in mind that I sort of serve this global vision and community, I wanted to unpack business architecture bit by bit, one drip at a time. So that's what I did. That's the journey I took for 4 years. And there was indeed a moment in fall 2020, I just had a flash of an insight that said, the series should end on 100 issues. And when that happens, I'm going to celebrate it and culminate it in a book.
Wow. So that was really how it all came together.
It was.
So cool. So that was 2020. What time frame in 2020?
It was fall, and I can remember that split second, like you can't believe it. Yeah, absolutely. But fall 2020, it was born. I mean, I didn't tell people till we got to the end, but I knew, okay, because the other thing was I kept going on this blog and I didn't know when I was going to end it. Yeah. So I decided 100's the right time.
Isn't that cool? I love epiphanies. I love when that, light bulb goes off and you kind of reboot your thought process or reboot whatever you're doing. And yeah, for me, it was, I read something in 1988 from a 1985 study but I read it in 88 and I was in front of about 18 salespeople in 1989. And I knew right then and there, standing up, holding the sales meeting, that I was going to write a book someday. But my book was going to center on empirical data, and it was going to then use real life situational observation, because just like that story I told about my ERP system experience, I love those stories because when you live through them, and much like you, I now, for 30 years, I've been living through stuff, and I take the notepad out and I write, I observe what went right, what went wrong, what could have been done different. And that's the way I've looked at things for 30 years. And it's amazing with that process, what you can see. But, you know, it was at epiphany moment in 1989, which was so cool. So you have a much more, I think, when I think of somebody writing a book, the way you did it is much more the way I thought of it. I spent 18 nights in the Ozark foothills of the Ozark Mountains writing my book, but share with us where you wrote your book. It's so cool.
Absolutely. So I did a similar sort of a, put myself on a retreat. So I wrote it on an island off the coast of southwest Norway. It's called Kutsøy, and it was just it's a small island. There's one grocery store, a lot of sheep, right? So, and I was alone in a cabin, the family cabin, very immersed, just quiet, just thoughts. I have to say, my father did pass away unexpectedly while I was writing the book. During this time, I flew back to the States. I wrote some of the book on my mom's porch outside in a hot Wisconsin summer, and then I came back and finished the rest of the book on the island. So yeah, very much a time of solitude, but it was pretty amazing how that information just channels through you. I was very grateful for it.
Yeah. Folks, well, I asked that question because I'm fascinated. When I saw the picture of her looking out at this vista, of the North Sea, and she's in this cabin, I'm like, oh my gosh, this, I mean, I had beautiful surroundings, but I will have to say, I did write one night I spent at the Lake Lawn Resort in Delavan, Wisconsin, which is right over near Lake Geneva. So I did spend one night, 18 in a cabin, one night in Lake Delavan. So, but again, Wisconsin's so beautiful. So cool. So what, give the listeners in the audience a little bit of a expectation glimpse of what would this book bring to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So just overall, I lay out a vision for strategy execution that is end-to-end cohesive, accountability from end to end. And what does it look like for the teams to work together to actually get idea into action? Because it's about more than just strategy or about solutions, right? It's about all the teams working together, including customer experience, as we're saying here. And then I lay out, and how do you build a strategic business architecture practice in your organization to do that? And I really unpack the what and the why and the how of business architecture. So there's a couple ways I could have gone on this book. I went with the strategy execution minor and the business architecture major. I could have flipped it, but I really felt that I needed to get all these ideas around business architecture out of my head and into people's hands. So the other thing I'll say about the book is it's written through the language of questions, which might be a little bit non-traditional, but I think about all the questions that I get from people around the world. So I literally I'm hearing them in my mind as I'm writing these questions and answering them. And I also, by writing them in a question answer format, I really felt like it's kind of like the blog. I felt like I'm in a constant conversation with people by them asking questions and me answering, even though it's in a written format.
Okay. Now, does the book go one step further and also answer the why to the answer to the question?
The why of business architecture? 100%, absolutely. And in fact, that's often what's missing. Many things just kind of focus on the practice or the blueprint. It is indeed the what, the why, and the how. Most definitely the why.
I mean, it's a big, I find today in today's business world that the why and not so much from a strategy point of view, but think of a customer. When you tell a customer an update or give them an update that's negative, it's not, you're going to miss the delivery, something's going to happen, you're going to short ship, you're going to back order, whatever it may be. Okay, that's great, you're telling them, but as the customer, they're wondering why, what happened? Can you tell me why? And I think the art of the deal is to get the why out of your mouth before they get the question about why out of their mouth. Whether it's internal, whether it's teammates, whether it's associates, whether it's operations and marketing. And, you know, if operations suggest that you should do something different in the business architecture to IT, then, you know what, tell the group why. So you do touch on the relevance and importance of that lacking business equation today.
Yes, yes. And you know, I even say there's a secret of business architecture. It's not about the business architecture, which sounds really crazy. But the truth is, we're a why in search of helping the organization with making better decisions more holistically, with being able to get ideas into action, with intentionally designing so that we're effective and agile and resilient. So you know, it's really not about the business architecture. It is much more in support of the bigger whys for the business, right? It's all about the value.
Okay. So this is this from what I can tell, and you mentioned it, this is a big book. This is big thinking. This is big thinking that breaks down the organization to smaller componentry. But I mean, you mentioned, and this is cool, I love it. You know, it's a tool book, right? I mean, this book is a tool book. You even mentioned, hey, you know, read the first chapter no matter who you are, but then you may find some other chapters resonate more with you and are more useful to you. But you want that book to be the 3 a.m. What would Wendy do, right? That's the book.
Exactly.
Yeah. Explain that a little bit. That's great.
I love it. It is. It was really my and I'll tell you, the original idea for the book was it was going to be the desk reference with like pictures on every page because I'm also very visual. But by wonderful forces bigger than me, I ended up finding a publisher and it's in this written format, which is good because it made me articulate everything. But I really envisioned the person to be able to, especially the practitioners, to say, whoa, how does business architecture help in this scenario? Let me go to that page. Or I'm about to have a conversation with the people in legal and compliance. What should I tell them how I can help, right? So I really wanted them to do it. This is also why I wrote the book in terms of questions. And you know, it may not seem like this to the lay person who isn't familiar with the topic, and I'm going to make a silly analogy, but this book is kind of like a neutron star. It's like, you know, when a star explodes and then it becomes really, 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 really dense. That's what this book is. It's 19 years of figuring out how things fit together and the best ways to explain things and just all the, you know, the uses for it, so that it really was meant to be the 3 a.m. what would Wendy do sort of a reference. Yeah,
that is so awesome. I mean, you know, because so many of us in the thought world, you know, or leadership world, I mean, we wake up and we're thinking, you know, our mind's going. My wife says, "What are you doing up at 4:30?" Babe, my mind's just going. You know, I can't turn it off. And so some things, you know, so that's a great, I love how you explain it. Talk about shared language a little bit. I think another thing that you touched on that we're missing today is this concept. Explain how this interplays with connecting, you know, bridging the gap between strategy and execution.
Most definitely. So I think that the biggest relevance is it goes back to our discussion on silos and how we have just sort of these different pockets of organizations, even though organizations are actively trying to shift the way they work and structure. But the truth is there's still a whole lot of silos out there, right? So I think that the shared language, which is shared words and shared mental model. In other words, a customer is this. A product is this, a payment is this, an asset is this. I know that sounds really basic, but depending where you sit in the organization, a customer is different or a product's different. So it's like we need a common language to speak. We need to speak enterprise, I call it, right? This language of enterprise. Right. Sometimes it's just fine to be in our silos and have all that sort of nuance and dialect, but sometimes when we're coming together to think and solve and make decisions for the organization as a whole, we need to have a common language that we speak, and it starts with the words. It also is the mental model, and that gets back to our point about the map. So actually seeing the organization in the same way. If I were to go to a different person in different parts of the organization, they would see it different. They would draw it different. So it's all about, you know, being able to see what are the capabilities we have? What are the value streams? Who are our stakeholders? even as simple as what products do we sell? And so why that shared language is important is not just to communicate and obviously make that more efficient, but when it comes time to make changes to the organization. And again, I'll go back to our point about customer experience, where if we want to deliver on a journey and a great experience for our customer, that's going to cross a lot of different departments. That's going to cross a lot of different processes and systems. And so we need a way to sort of, understand how we're actually going to deliver on that. And the customer doesn't care that, you have 5 systems you have to get rid of, right? They want a good experience, and we have to be able to show up that way. And we have to have a map that says, where are we today? Where are we going? And how are we going to get there? Right, over time.
Absolutely. And you know what, folks, if you're at the C-suite level and you're listening to this and you haven't grasped onto this shared language concept, I'm going to take it a step further. How vital is it? How many times do I see in my walk with 32 companies the lack of the shared language? It's all over the place. I'll give you, and then the other thing, that the other stepping stone to another derivative, if you will, of this shared language is we make the mistakes all the time as companies that we adopt this internal language and we expect the customer to understand our internal language, and they don't. I mean, and it reveals itself in so many funny ways. I have a situation not too long ago where, I'm working for a company and purchase orders are issued to the company, and then the company internalizes those into a sales order, but they erase the purchase order number. Now, how can you do that? I don't know. So now they never talk to the customer in terms of purchase order. They go, oh, your sales order number, here's what's happening. Well, which PO is this from? I got to go research that. Well, why? Just things like this, and we miss the boat. And internally, we end up talking with all these acronyms and things internally, and then we start expressing those with customers, and it sounds like gibberish to the customer. It's all this cryptic stuff, and it's not. So again, one step further is not only should our areas that are within the business architecture adopt this commonality, this shared language, but don't spill this out to the customers without explaining. They don't know it, And I'll give you a perfect example. When you deal with the Army, especially Army Air Force Exchange Service, they say, hey, listen, inside here, we all have a common language and we use acronyms to describe the common language. So guess what? If you're going to do business with us, go to the website, click on this tab, and there's a 14-page document, pull it down. When you get an acronym and it says MOQ, that means minimum order quantity. Don't ask me to tell you what it is. You guys learn our common language. So, so there's this necessity in it. And so I'm going to tie this together with the aligning of common goals, because within the necessity for business architecture, as I'm learning more about your niche, I'm realizing that even though to the common executive brain, aligning common goals, you kind of laugh and go, well, sure, who doesn't want to do that? But they're not doing that. Talk about that a little bit within that realm of business architecture.
Absolutely. And again, to your point, it seems obvious to people. Of course, we're doing that. There's a lot of statistics and a phenomenon of strategy diffusion. There's these ideas of strategies or goals or objectives, and as they make their way through the organization, people don't necessarily know what they mean to them. So I think there's 2 parts of this. One is unpacking what it means into clear business focal points. Let me explain what that means. So being very clear, because different parts of organizations do things differently. So what's a goal? How do we define a goal? What's the syntax? What's the level of elevation? How about an objective? How about a course of action, right? Literally just sort of breaking down, decomposing, unpacking what the direction is, so that it gets increasingly more tangible. Now, that's the second part. Making it more tangible is the other part. And this is also where we help to bridge the strategy and execution gap. Otherwise, it's like, okay, meet this revenue goal or this customer experience goal, but how do we do it? And then that interpretation, that translation happens in silos. So there's a translation layer of value streams and capabilities that basically give us the map and say, draw the circle around what's changing in this organization. That's the thing that helps people to understand what does this mean to me,
Yeah.
right? These
Yeah.
common goals and how they fit together. And furthermore, just even being able to rationalize goals and objectives and strategies and initiatives across an entire organization, right? That's part of what
Yeah.
we're really trying to do. Yeah.
See, and there's where the why, in my opinion, is so necessary. And your employees are craving for this question to be answered. Okay, I'm going through all this. It's taken me 3 months. Why are we doing it this way? And I think it's wow. I love it. So, Wendy, we hear the term stakeholder so much today, or at least it seems like it's coming on more and more. Define within the realm of business art, what's a stakeholder?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually have a sustainability background, so I can't help but to look at stakeholder as the biggest definition for an organization, and even the Business Roundtable, right? So the group of Fortune 500 CEOs actually changed the purpose of a corporation from shareholder to stakeholder. So stakeholder I look at as customers, of course, or constituents if you're government or nonprofit, partners, employees, community, governance and governance bodies, and environment or sustainability. So I really look at all of them. Within the business architecture, we actually have an anchor. We have a focal point that allows us to get very specific about groups of people. But generally speaking, I look at those as the bucket. And today's digital connected enterprise, I feel more than ever has to be thinking about all those stakeholders, because our impacts are more than just, internal.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does your book address that? I mean, or I assume it does in various forms, but I mean, how do you address that in the book? If you could?
Absolutely. So first of all, the guiding light, the orienting point of a business architecture is the customer or the constituent, hands down. It's not internally looking. We craft it around the customer, which means that everybody in the organization kind of knows where they fit in to serve that customer. It doesn't mean we're all not important. We are, but when we're in that context, we're serving a customer or a constituent. So that's the first way we really think about it. The second thing is back to the idea of impact analysis. So anything we might do, whether it's a new product or going into a new market or building a facility, we can consult the business architecture, we can consult the blueprint and understand what's the butterfly effect and to whom, internally and externally. That's part of what I like about the business architecture. It's not just internal, we also have external stakeholders. And maybe one other idea is specific scenarios such as sustainability. We can actually embed that kind of thinking into the blueprint. So I can understand for different capabilities, maybe it's delivering a product or packaging product, something like that. I can see what are the sustainability considerations I need to be thinking about if I'm going to either be responsible for this capability or, or I'm going to make some changes to it. So lots of ways, actually, we're very much all about, looking at people, looking at impact, making this human, and seeing that bigger picture of stakeholders.
Does that impact also translate to the internal side of the fence, the employee, the associates that are part of this machine?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Employees and external partners. And furthermore, we can, with the blueprint, we can aggregate impact. So I can understand maybe if there's a certain employee group that has a lot of change that's happening, right? Maybe we want to spread that change out. So it does. I love it because it helps us to objectify, or not objective, but make objective decisions and really quantify these things as well.
Yeah, I love the idea of that butterfly effect, that there's a ripple effect, there's an impact out there. And again, I think a lot of us, don't understand that even within, and I'll get to what I really love. I think we are even missing it in the day-to-day experiences of doing business. Like, for instance, I just heard about it. One of my friends became an executive at a company, and he is not allowed to, he reports to the CEO, but he is not allowed to email the CEO an email that has more than one sentence in it, because the CEO does not read past the first sentence. Now, Talk about impact. Okay, how does that impact the organization? Well, first of all, I think it trickles down. Second of all, it trickles out. It ends up going out to the customer because, for Pete's sake, if you're not even going to care about the fact that I have 3 questions and you only have time to answer 1, I've got to write. I mean, honestly, it's childish. It's adolescent, in my opinion. But this impact, it's so important to think about that today because, again, we have a consumer base, we have a constituent base that's asking that question. What is this going to do to that? How is this going to affect this? You know what I mean? So it's so important. So I live in the transactional experience. You talk about the transformative experience. What's the difference?
Great question, because they're both needed, right? The transformative experience is getting from one place to another place. And I'm often speaking in terms of reimagining how something works. It might be reimagining how, maybe it is reimagining experience. Maybe it's reimagining the business model. Maybe it's reimagining our products and services. So transformative is really that. I think there's a lot of confusion around this word, and people do mix transformational and transactional, but transformation is really about going from one place to another at a macro level and doing something different. Transformative, like the caterpillar and the butterfly, right? You become something different. And yeah, exactly. That's where the big change is.
So would it be, I mean, if we broke it down to a very simplistic model, would it be fair to say that, the transformative experience will end up creating the transactional experience?
100%.
And so if you never want to deliver 3-day-old wilted mint leaves in your mojito to another customer, you've got to go through some type of transformative experience to get the transactional to line up, correct?
Absolutely. And 100%. And I'm glad you drew that tie, because that's exactly right.
And this is where, this is just the frustrating stuff out there that, I love the fact that that anybody can really benefit from areas of your book, because they can see things not only through a larger big picture prism, but they understand that everything, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everything that you're doing ends up flowing out to the eventual toucher, user, purchaser of that product or service, correct?
Absolutely. And if we all think that way, and we're all thinking about the customer, and then sometimes we're the customer, right? But if we're always thinking about serving the customer, it's just, it all comes together, right? It gives us the guiding light to act in so many different ways and to transcend our daily stuff, right? And what we're trying to do. There's a bigger why.
Yeah, exactly. So digital transformation, it's a buzz phrase that we're hearing a lot. Maybe the average, citizen doesn't really understand what the stamp of that phrase really represents. Just for those who don't know, how would you define digital transformation?
Yeah, and in the same vein of being reinventing, being transformative, digital transformation is that it's leveraging technology for strategic purposes, to reinvent business models, to reinvent products. Digital transformation is not modernizing, right, your systems. It's not automating something today that you're doing on spreadsheets. It is transformative, right? And it's, I just think we've never lived in a cooler time. All the options that digital technology opens up for us to do business and to work in different ways is just, it's mind-blowing and exciting in a lot of different ways. I do think, Jeff, that, I just feel like we sort of reached a point somewhere during the pandemic where a little bit of this buzz on digital transformation, like people just finally got their arms around it a little bit. And like, let's just get down to work and doing the work and what this means. And I really feel like digital business is just business. I have to say, every day it feels more and more irrelevant for me to talk about digital transformation or digital business, because it's just the way we do business now. And if we look at the Institute for Digital Transformation, there's a digital transformation manifesto. The tenets they lay out, they're just how organizations behave. Yeah. I mean, technology just underpins it. It's not really about the technology. Yeah.
So is it fair to say, I mean, I can't imagine there's too many C-suite people who don't view it the same way you do. I mean, am I wrong or right?
True, but I think there's still a lot of misconception, or especially depending on where people are on their journey, either in their organization, industry, or region, because we are different maturities here, right, across the spectrum. I think there's still misconception that digital transformation is digitizing, right, automating and things like that, versus I don't know that everyone's caught on to the entire opportunity of the reimagining with technology. But you know what? But both are important, digitalization and reimagining as well as digitizing. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just such exciting stuff. I mean, I honestly, and the golden thread, just let's sum it up with the golden thread. I read this quote. If you need me to find, I'll get it. But explain the golden thread that really does what?
Oh, absolutely. The golden thread knits together strategy and execution. We often have the strategy in the initiative part, but we have the missing middle, and that is where we add the business architecture, and that is our translation layer, and that is how we get actionable and move into coordinated action. So the golden thread are the strategic parts of strategy, goal, objective, course of action, the architecture part of the value streams and capabilities, and that's going to orchestrate the changes to people, process, technology, and then the initiatives that will deliver those changes and those solutions to actually make that real. And that thread knits it together. That thread allows us to look at what we're doing today and is it aligned? And that thread allows us to stop what we're doing if we have a disruption and replan and work it again. So that's what it is. And actually the cover of the book, this is very subtle, but there are some light threads going around that circle, and that is meant to be the golden thread going through the strategy and execution.
Yeah. Well, I'm an apparel guy. For 8 years, I did private label apparel. So, I lived the warp and the weft and the, shuttle taking the weft yarn, I mean, it's the way it was. And so it's a cool thing for me to, an analogy wise to tap into. Again, execution, and I'm that kind of guy in the customer experience that I go down to the ground level. And even within all of this that we're talking about, what I find today to be the Achilles heel in business is lack of follow through. So you could loosely use the word execution for that. But what I mean by that is, I call it the 3 Ys. Say yes to responding to all inquiries. Say yes to following up, and say yes to following through. What's the difference between following up and following through? Following up is saying, Wendy, I got your email. I got your request. I'm looking into it. I should know or have the answer in 24 hours. I'll be back to you. But then what happens? 36 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, you're wondering what's going on. Hey, Jeff, what's going on? I never respond. A week goes by. You've tried leaving me 5 messages, 4 emails. I'm not responding. All of a sudden, I pop out of some, whatever. I pop into the scene a week later and answer your question. But it's the lack of follow through. So, you're talking obviously about a bigger picture, but I still say, and I urge anybody out there, think about the ground level of all those operatives that are involved in this architecture building, in this the eventual deliverables that you're giving. Are you, as individuals, everywhere you work in that company, are you following through? And I'm telling you, Wendy, I've looked at it for 30 years. Rick Diana knows it's my pet peeve. I mean, it's everywhere. The lack of follow through is everywhere. And it's frustrating. So, I think that this execution concept, it's so cool because you want to make sure you avoid the knee slap, you avoid the misconnection, like my story with the ERP. So, I live in a different experience zone, and that's what's cool about business. As we break business down, I define my niche. You found yours 19 years ago, and you describe yourself as a pioneer, a business architecture pioneer, by the way. And, I'd have to say, in a way, people weren't looking at the customer experience in 1988. They weren't talking about that. And I knew this was where this was headed. Perception was going to end up being the reality of the consumer, even though it really wasn't the reality. But how they perceived those transactions to go, just like that guy who owns the restaurant, right? Who delivered the wilty mint leaf and the mojito. That's not her intention owning the restaurant. They don't want to, that's not in their plan, their strategy for business. But somewhere along the line, strategy and execution didn't happen. So, and it's a bad experience. So anyway, well, listen, this has been so fun. So we have some upcoming things we're going to mention here. You have a kind of a party going on after your book release. Mention a little bit about that, and then we'll mention about a book signing as well. Tell us a little bit about this party that's going on.
Yeah, you got it. So partying in New York City, back home. That's going to feel really good. So on book launch day, Tuesday, 20 September, we're going to have a celebration, I'll say, from 6 to 9 p.m. at High Bar, New York City. So great views and great vibes. And then we'll also be having a book signing earlier in the day. And on screen here, we'll share details on where people can find that same day as well.
Absolutely. So we're going to leave that up for about a minute, folks. You can take screenshots of it and, find out where you can go, meet Wendy, get a signed book. Your ebook has been out and is out currently, correct?
Correct.
How can folks find you online, Wendy?
Yeah, you bet. So LinkedIn is probably an easy place to find me. So name is spelled WHYNDE KUEHN. So that's on LinkedIn. And probably one of the best websites to go to find the book or information about the book or how to find the book is strategyintoreality.com. So strategyintoreality.com. And through one of those avenues, you can find me and you can find the book.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so exciting and big day, September 20th. We wish you all the best. I wish we could be there. We're not going to be able to be in New York City, but we'll certainly love to see some of the pictures and follow some of the activities that day. But no, excellent. Appreciate it. Is there anything before I ask you my last question, is there anything I forgot to ask you that's vital to the book?
Not at all. I really have appreciated this dialogue and all of your thoughtful questions. It's really an honor to be here, Jeff, and just a thank you for all that you do for business, for people, and how you get these stories and perspectives out on this podcast. So again, really thank you. I'm very honored.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I much like you, I'm learning more and more and more about the value of questions. And so you mentioned your book is really focused around a lot of questions that, and I think it's a great way to do things. So with that, the last question I have for you is we do a fun thing at the end of every show. We call it the Lost in the Shuffle track, and it's a rock and roll song. It's a song. It could be anything that's important to you. It's played a role in you, and maybe not everybody's heard it or whatever, but but maybe they have. What's the important Lost in the Shuffle track in Wendy's life?
Mine is Born Free by Kid Rock. So yes, I'm a Kid Rock fan, but I love this song because when it came out, it was a very transformative time in my life. And I am just this ultimate free spirit, love everybody, anything's possible. And so Born Free, I hope for all of us, and just really appreciate that spirit. So.
Yeah, well, great song, great message. Feel the same way. We grew up in an environment that just was so awesome to have that freedom, and I know it's been paid for many hundreds of thousands of times over. But yeah, so Kid Rock out of Michigan. By the way, that we're going to put so folks, if you're watching the YouTube or on the YouTube experience, you're going to see a little card pop up there, and you can click on that and go to Kid Rock's video. I looked at 76 million views on this video. Quite a few. So that's a lot. But Wendy, we have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you. Can't wait to read the book. Thoroughly enjoyed our time today. You are a very just special, unique breath of fresh air in the business world. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. And folks, we will see you next week in 168 hours. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thank you so much.